If statement pitfalls. There's some real issues with if statements that can really trip you up. I wanted to highlight some. First is the dangerous semicolon. As you know, regular statements must end with a semicolon. But it turns out that the semicolon all by itself is a legal statement. This is actually useful in some places, but more frequently it causes errors in beginners. If you're like me, who forgets semicolons, then you're likely to go back and sort of compulsively put them in at the end of statements, seeing where you've forgotten them before. The problem is, not every line ends a statement. In fact, we most commonly have if and a condition on a line, and if we forget to use the brace or choose not to use the open brace because there's only going to be a single statement after it, when you're looking at your lines you might not think and put a semicolon after if and a condition. This is deadly. Let me rearrange the white space. Of course, the compiler doesn't care, but this is the way that would be more helpful for a user to see what is actually happening above. This semicolon by itself here is a whole statement. It is the statement that comes after the condition, and here we indent it to show it off. By the way, if you really do want an empty statement, not very likely with an if statement, but possibly with a later while statement, putting it on a line indented by itself is recommended. But anyhow, here, following up with this bad code up here, this is not a part of the clause directly after the condition in the if statement. It is not part of the if statement at all. I show it here indented at the same level as the if, which is not misleading. What actually happens is this always gets executed, since it's not a part of the if statement. And looking at this code, that's certainly not what you'd think. Let's review the idea of putting in the braces around the statement that you want to follow a condition. If you do that, following the condition by the open brace, then even if you come back later and are looking to put in semicolons and see, oh, there's no semicolon at the end of this line, I'll add one, you don't do any damage, you waste a keystroke. This is completely unnecessary, but an empty statement as the first statement of a compound statement that does then move on to the writing that you want doesn't make any difference. The extra semicolon has no effect. Another heading where you may put a semicolon in error is a function definition. This is common for beginners to put an innocent looking semicolon here. Unfortunately, it causes a major headache. The semicolon, actually the brace that you're then likely to have follow it, causes an error. It's likely to be cryptic. It has to do with advanced uses that we haven't talked about for the semicolon here, and you need to watch out. If you have a problem that you don't understand with a heading, you might concentrate and think, did I put a semicolon after it? Even if you put in open and close braces every time that you use an if statement, you could well see examples written by other people. You should be able to read them. We will see that the braces can help you avoid some errors there. Here's another example where I indent it to the way I might intend it. I have an if statement which can include any statement, including an if statement. We haven't done this before, an if inside an if. We've just done an if inside of an else, if you remember. If I want to say essentially that if x is greater than 0, and also if y is greater than 0, write that x and y are both positive, then if that's what I mean, logically, we could say else the other case would be that x is not positive. And we haven't tested y because we don't get there if x is not positive. But if you line it up this way, thinking that this if goes with this else and suggesting it by your indentation, you're also wrong. You recall that an else is optional in the addition after an if statement. And if you look here, there is an if statement here. Sure, it could have an else after it, but there is also an if statement here which could have an else after it. And the way the syntax works, the else goes with the closest possible if statement before it that could take an else. So this is equivalent to this indentation that reflects what's actually happening. If x is greater than 0, we do this if-else statement. If y is greater than 0, then we do the first part, else, that is to say, when y is not greater than 0, we do this other part. This is avoided if you do put in the braces. If you mean this if statement to be the thing you do when this if condition is true, and we follow the pattern that we were suggesting of putting that clause in braces, then we don't have the problem. This if statement is enclosed in these braces, meaning it, in this case, is all of a compound statement. Because of the enclosing braces, this else can't go with it, and if you follow back before this statement where you can't match, you come to this if, and you see that that if goes with that else. So this dangling if problem is avoided if we just follow our pattern of putting braces around the block that is supposed to be executed if the condition is true. Another thing about missing braces. Let's suppose you write a statement, if x is greater than 0, I want to print something. And it's just a single statement, so I don't really need braces. That's syntactically correct, and I'll indent it according to our conventions to show it off, and that's fine. Now this is a really silly little change, but just as an example, let's suppose I wanted this to appear on 2 lines, and so I split it, and I say, okay, console write down x is, and then we'll write down positive on the next line. And I indent this all here to the same amount, making it look like the indented block after this if statement's true condition, but my indentation is misleading. Whether this statement is indented or not, one statement after this condition is what is executed as a part of this if statement when the condition is true, and that's this statement. The added statement, even though I happen to indent it, is not a part of the block or the statement that is executed when x is greater than 0. It's not a part of this complete if statement here at all. It is always executed. Once again, if you had remembered to put braces around the block or the statement that you wanted to include when this condition is true, then when you added another line right under it, it would naturally come in before the outdented closed brace, and then you don't have a problem. This between the braces is a single compound statement. That's the way we usually do our responses to an if statement, and there's no problem. You get both parts. So this should reinforce you using braces with if statements. And then there is still the problem, just be reminded about the extra semicolons. If you should somehow tuck it in before the brace. Even if we had here, if I put in a semicolon before the brace here, or put the open brace on the next line, and so I didn't notice it and put a semicolon here, we'd have the same problem.